I died on the cold marble floor, my hands clutching my stomach as blood spread beneath me, my sister's voice trembling above me, not with fear, but with poorly hidden excitement as she whispered that it wasn't supposed to happen like this, while the man I loved stood beside her in silence, watching me fade without reaching out. And that was the last thing I saw before everything went dark. And then I woke up, gasping for air as if I had been dragged back from the depths, my eyes snapping open to the same chandelier, the same room, the same untouched engagement dress hanging exactly where it had been before my death, my phone buzzing in my hand with the same message I had received hours before everything fell apart. And in that moment, I knew. I had come back. My body trembled as I stood before the mirror, searching for blood, for bruises, for any sign of the end I remembered so clearly. But there was nothing. Only my reflection staring back at me, alive, unbroken. Yet when my hand slowly pressed against my stomach, a strange warmth pulsed beneath my palm, and my breath caught. Because in my last life, I hadn't known about the child until it was too late. And yet now, somehow, impossibly, I could feel it, as if fate itself had refused to let me lose everything again. Memories crashed over me like a storm. Every betrayal, every lie, every moment I had been humiliated, abandoned, destroyed by the very people I trusted most, my sister, my fiancé, my own family. And instead of fear, something colder took root inside me, something sharper than grief, something that felt like control. A slow smile formed on my lips as I picked up my phone, my fingers steady now as I opened the live stream app, turning the camera toward the door just as it began to creak open on cue. Exactly like before, except this time, I wasn't the victim walking into a trap. I was the one setting it. And as the light from the screen reflected in my eyes, I whispered softly, almost gently, "Let's try this again, but this time, I'll be the one watching you fall." The livestream counter climbed faster than I expected, numbers stacking on top of each other as if the entire world had been waiting for a scandal to unfold. And for a brief second, I almost laughed. Because in my last life, I had been the joke they all shared. The girl who got cheated on and still begged to be loved. The fool who cried while everyone else watched. But not this time. Not anymore. Because this time, I was the one holding the camera, controlling the angle, deciding exactly what they would see and when they would see it. And as the door slowly opened, just like I remembered, I didn't move, didn't breathe too loudly, didn't interrupt the perfect timing of fate repeating itself. My sister stepping in first with that same soft, fragile expression she had practiced so well. Her fingers lightly brushing the edge of my engagement dress, as if she had every right to touch it, to wear it, to take everything that was mine. And right behind her, just as expected, came the man who had once promised to spend his life with me, his gaze immediately locking onto her instead of me, as if I had already disappeared from the story, as if I had never been the one standing here in the first place. And the comments began to explode across the screen, lines of disbelief and excitement flashing so fast they blurred together. People asking if this was real, if this was staged, if I was really filming my own humiliation. And I tilted the phone slightly, adjusting the frame so their faces were clearer, sharper, undeniable. Because evidence mattered this time. Every second mattered, every expression mattered. And when my sister finally noticed the camera, her body froze for just a fraction of a second before she recovered. Her lips trembling as she looked at me like I was the intruder, like I was the one who had walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. And I almost admired her, really, the way she could switch roles so quickly, from thief to victim in the blink of an eye. "What are you doing?" she asked softly, her voice shaking just enough to sound convincing. And the man beside her frowned, stepping slightly in front of her as if to protect her, as if I was the threat. And that was when I felt it again, that strange, steady warmth beneath my hand, grounding me, reminding me that this wasn't a dream, that I wasn't about to fall apart like before. And instead of answering, I smiled, slowly, deliberately, letting the silence stretch just long enough for the tension to build, for the audience to lean in, for the moment to become something bigger than just a private betrayal. "Don't stop," I said finally, my voice calm, almost amused, and their expressions shifted, confusion flickering across their faces, as if they couldn't quite understand why I wasn't reacting the way I was supposed to, why I wasn't crying, why I wasn't screaming, why I wasn't begging, because that was the version of me they knew, the version they had broken so easily before. And the comments surged again, people picking sides, some calling me crazy, others urging me to expose them, to show more, to prove everything, and I obliged, stepping slightly to the side so the camera captured the full scene, the dress, the distance between us, the way his hand hovered near her waist, hesitant but not enough to pull away. And I remembered this exact moment from my last life, remembered how my heart had shattered piece by piece as I watched them. Remembered how I had still tried to believe there was an explanation, that there had to be some misunderstanding. But now, standing here again with the same people, the same lies waiting to be spoken, all I felt was clarity, cold and precise, like a blade. "Tell them," I said quietly, my eyes fixed on my sister. And for a split second, something dangerous flickered in her gaze, something calculating, before she lowered her head, her shoulders trembling as she stepped forward, exactly as she had done before. "I didn't mean for you to find out like this," she whispered, her voice breaking at just the right places. And I almost applauded, because it was perfect. Every word, every pause, every tear forming in her eyes. It was the same performance that had destroyed me once, and the audience was eating it up. Comments flooding in with sympathy for her, anger toward me, assumptions already forming before the truth had even been revealed. And then, just like before, she reached for his hand, clinging to him as if she needed protection, as if she was the one being wronged. And he didn't hesitate this time, didn't pull away, didn't even look at me as he wrapped an arm around her shoulders, his expression hardening as he finally spoke. "This isn't what you think," he said, his tone defensive, almost annoyed, as if I was the inconvenience, the obstacle standing in the way of what he really wanted. And something inside me almost snapped at how familiar it all felt, how predictable, how painfully scripted their betrayal had been all along. But instead of reacting, instead of giving them the scene they expected, I let out a soft laugh, the sound cutting through the tension in a way that made both of them freeze. And I could see it then, the first crack in their confidence, the first hint that something wasn't going according to their plan, because I wasn't following the script anymore. I wasn't the girl who would collapse at their feet, and the live stream numbers kept rising. Thousands turning into tens of thousands, drawn in by the rawness of the moment, by the strange calm of the girl being betrayed, by the subtle shift in power that they couldn't quite name yet. And I lifted the phone slightly higher, making sure every expression was captured, every lie documented, because this time there would be no rewriting the story, no twisting the narrative to make me the villain, no escaping the consequences of what they had done. And as my sister tightened her grip on him, preparing to say the words that had once destroyed me, I stepped closer, my smile widening just enough to make her hesitate, just enough to make her voice falter for a split second. And that was all I needed, that tiny moment of doubt, that flicker of fear, because this time I wasn't just reliving the past, I was rewriting it. And they had no idea that the ending they were so confident in no longer belonged to them. The moment my sister's voice cracked into that carefully practiced confession, the entire room seemed to tilt in her favor, as if the world itself had chosen its side. And I watched it happen with a clarity that felt almost cruel, because I had seen this exact scene before, lived through every word, every accusation, every look of disappointment that would soon be thrown at me like stones. "I didn't want to hurt you," she whispered, clutching his sleeve as though she needed him to stay standing, as though she was the fragile one here. "But we've been in love for a long time. We just didn't know how to tell you." And right on cue, the comments exploded again, sympathy flooding toward her, outrage redirecting toward me. Strangers who knew nothing about us suddenly convinced they understood everything, calling me blind, calling me delusional, calling me the problem. And in my last life, that had been the moment I broke, the moment I started doubting myself, wondering if maybe I really had missed something obvious, if maybe I really had been standing in the way of something real. But this time, I simply watched, my gaze steady, my grip on the phone unwavering, because I knew exactly what came next. I knew how deep their lies went, and more importantly, I knew how far they were willing to push me to protect them. "Say something," he said suddenly, his voice sharper now, irritated by my silence, by my refusal to react the way he expected. And for a brief second, our eyes met, and I saw it there, not guilt, not regret, but annoyance, as if my existence in this moment was nothing more than an inconvenience to him. And it was almost funny, how easily love had turned into indifference, how quickly I had become disposable in his eyes. And yet, in my last life, I had begged this man not to leave me, had cried until my voice gave out, had humiliated myself in front of everyone just to keep him. And the memory of that version of me burned like acid in my chest, not because it hurt, but because it disgusted me, because I refused to be her again. "What do you want me to say?" I asked finally, my tone calm, almost bored, and that was enough to throw them off balance, just slightly, just enough for me to feel the shift, the subtle crack forming beneath their confidence, because they couldn't control me if they couldn't predict me, and my sister's brows furrowed as she stepped forward, her eyes glistening as she reached out as if to grab my hand, as if we were still sisters, as if there was still something worth saving between us. "Please don't make this harder than it already is," she said, softly, and I almost laughed again, because harder for who exactly? For her, who had stolen everything and still wanted sympathy? For him, who had chosen her without hesitation? Or for me, who had already died once because of them? The live stream kept climbing, tens of thousands now, each viewer a witness, each comment a spark, fueling the fire that was beginning to spread beyond this room. And I could feel it building, the pressure, the expectation, the collective hunger for a reaction, for tears, for drama, for the collapse of the girl who had just been betrayed in front of the world. And instead, I took a slow step back, widening the frame, giving them more space, more visibility, more rope to hang themselves with. And that was when my mother's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough," she said sharply as she entered the room, her gaze immediately landing on me, not on them, not on the obvious betrayal unfolding right in front of her, but on me, as if I was the one causing the scene, as if I was the one who needed to be stopped. And the familiarity of it all hit me like a wave, because this too had happened before. This exact look, this exact tone, the way she had chosen them over me without even asking what had really happened. "Turn that off," she demanded, pointing at my phone, her expression tightening with disapproval. And in my last life, I had obeyed, had shut everything down, had tried to protect the family's reputation even as they destroyed mine. But this time, I didn't move, didn't lower the phone, didn't break eye contact. And the silence that followed was heavier than any argument, because it wasn't just defiance, it was a refusal to play my assigned role. "You're embarrassing us," she continued, her voice colder now, sharper. And I tilted my head slightly, considering her words, weighing them against the memory of how things had ended before, against the image of myself lying on that cold marble floor, bleeding, alone, abandoned by the very people who now stood here judging me. And something inside me settled, something final, something irreversible. No, I said quietly, and the word felt heavier than it should have, as if it carried the weight of every time I had said yes when I should have refused. Every time I had stayed silent when I should have spoken. Every time I had allowed myself to be pushed aside for the sake of people who would never choose me. And the room went still, my sister's grip tightening on him, his expression darkening, my mother's eyes narrowing as if she was seeing me for the first time. And maybe she was, because this version of me had never existed before. This version who didn't flinch, who didn't beg, who didn't apologize for something she didn't do. You don't get to decide when I'm embarrassing, I continued, my voice steady, controlled, each word deliberate, and the comments surged again, the audience sensing the shift, the change in direction, the beginning of something they hadn't expected, something far more dangerous than simple heartbreak. And I could almost feel their attention sharpen, their curiosity deepen, because this wasn't just a betrayal anymore. It was a confrontation, a power struggle, a story that was no longer following the script they thought they knew. And as my sister opened her mouth to speak again, to twist the narrative further, to paint herself as the victim once more, I stepped forward, closing the distance between us just enough to make her hesitate, just enough to remind her that I wasn't backing down, not this time, not ever again. And I smiled, slow and deliberate, my eyes locking onto hers as I said, "If you're going to lie, at least make it interesting." And for the first time since the live stream began, real fear flickered across her face, brief but undeniable. Because somewhere deep down, she realized what I had already known from the moment I opened my eyes. I wasn't here to survive this scene. I was here to end it. The moment the room finally fell into a fragile, suffocating silence after my words, I could feel every gaze pressing down on me, waiting, judging, trying to figure out what I would do next. But instead of giving them another reaction to dissect, I lowered the phone just slightly. Not enough to end the live stream, not enough to hide anything, just enough to shift the focus back onto myself. And for the first time since everything began, I placed my hand over my stomach without hiding it, without pretending it meant nothing. Because the truth was, it meant everything. Even if no one else in that room understood it yet, even if I barely understood it myself. And a strange, quiet warmth spread beneath my palm again, steady and undeniable, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to just me. And for a split second, the noise of the world faded, the comments, the accusations, the tension, all of it dissolving into something distant, because my mind had already drifted somewhere else, somewhere darker, somewhere that still smelled like blood and betrayal, back to the moment I died, back to the pain that had torn through me as I realized too late what I had lost. Not just my life, but the fragile, unspoken hope growing inside me that I never even had the chance to protect. And my fingers curled slightly as that memory resurfaced, sharper now, clearer, as if death itself had carved it into my bones so I would never forget. And maybe that was the reason I was standing here now, breathing, thinking, remembering. Because I wasn't meant to forget. I was meant to return, to correct, to take back everything that had been stolen from me, including this child. And as that realization settled, something inside me shifted, something deeper than anger, deeper than revenge, something instinctive and unyielding. And when I lifted my gaze again, I knew my expression had changed, because the way they looked at me changed too. Confusion mixing with something uneasy, something uncertain, as if they were seeing a version of me that didn't match the one they thought they knew. "What are you doing?" my sister asked again, her voice thinner now, less controlled, her eyes flickering briefly to my hand before darting away as if she didn't want to acknowledge what she had seen. And I followed her gaze deliberately, letting the movement draw attention, letting the camera capture it all, every subtle reaction, every flicker of discomfort. Because this wasn't just about exposing their betrayal anymore, this was about rewriting the entire narrative, piece by piece, moment by moment, until there was no room left for them to twist it. And I could feel the audience catching on, the comments shifting tone, curiosity bleeding into speculation as they began to notice the detail I had just made impossible to ignore. Wait, why is she holding her stomach? Is she okay? Something feels off. And I almost smiled at that because they were starting to see it, starting to question, starting to doubt the simple story my sister had tried so hard to sell them. And doubt was all I needed. Doubt was the crack that would eventually shatter everything. "Nothing," I said softly when she kept staring at me, my voice calm, almost indifferent. But I didn't move my hand, didn't hide the gesture, because hiding it would mean fear, and I was done being afraid, done pretending that what I carried, what I had carried even in death, was something to be ashamed of. And the irony of it all almost made me laugh, because in my last life, this had been my greatest weakness, the secret that had destroyed me when it was finally revealed too late, the truth that had left me vulnerable, desperate, willing to forgive anything just to protect a future that was never meant to exist. But now, standing here again with that same truth beating quietly beneath my skin, it didn't feel like a weakness anymore. It felt like power, like a second chance wrapped in something fragile yet unbreakable. And I knew then that I wouldn't let anyone take it from me again, no matter what it cost, no matter who I had to stand against, even if that meant tearing apart everything that once defined my life. "You're acting strange," he said suddenly, his voice cutting through my thoughts, sharper than before, more cautious, as if he had finally started to notice that something wasn't right, that I wasn't reacting the way I should. And I met his gaze slowly, studying him in a way I never had before, not as someone I loved, not as someone I needed, but as someone I had already lost once and would not lose again, because this time, losing him meant nothing, and that realization alone was enough to strip him of whatever power he once held over me. "Am I?" I replied lightly, tilting my head just enough to mirror the curiosity in his expression, and for a moment, neither of us spoke, the air between us thick with something unspoken, something shifting, something that refused to settle into the roles we had played before. And then, just as the tension threatened to stretch too far, to snap into something irreversible, the door behind them opened again, slower this time, quieter, yet somehow commanding more attention than everything that had happened so far. And I didn't need to turn to know who it was, didn't need to see his face to feel the subtle change in the atmosphere, the way the room seemed to recalibrate itself around his presence, because even in my last life, even in the blurred, fading memories of everything I had lost, there had always been one person who stood apart from the rest. One person who never fully belonged to the chaos, yet was always somehow connected to it, watching, calculating, waiting. And when I finally did look, my breath caught, not from shock, but from recognition, because he looked exactly the same, unchanged by time, untouched by the events that had destroyed me, his gaze sharp, unreadable as it swept across the room before settling on me, lingering just a fraction longer than it should have, as if he was searching for something, as if he sensed something different, even if he couldn't name it. And for a brief, fleeting moment, something unfamiliar flickered in his eyes, something that felt dangerously close to awareness, as if the threads of another life were brushing against his consciousness, pulling at him, trying to remind him of something he couldn't quite remember. And my heart skipped, not out of fear, not out of affection, but out of something far more complicated, something that didn't belong entirely to this life or the last. Because if there was anyone in this world who might understand what it meant to stand at the edge of something broken and still choose to move forward, it would be him. And as that thought settled, as the weight of everything I carried, my memories, my anger, my second chance, and the life quietly growing inside me, aligned into something steady, something deliberate, I straightened slightly, my hand still resting over my stomach. my gaze meeting his without hesitation, without doubt. And in that silent exchange, something shifted, subtle but undeniable, like the first move in a game that had already been played once before. Except this time, the outcome was no longer fixed. This time, I had changed the rules. And whether he realized it yet or not, whether he remembered anything at all, he had just stepped into a story that no longer belonged to the past, but to me. The moment his presence settled into the room, everything changed in a way that was subtle yet impossible to ignore. As if the invisible balance that had been tipping toward my sister and the man beside her suddenly froze mid-air, recalibrating itself around someone who had never needed to raise his voice to be heard. And I watched as their expressions shifted almost instinctively, my sister's fingers tightening around the sleeve she had been clutching, her posture straightening as if she had been caught in something she couldn't quite explain, while the man who had just been so certain of himself took half a step back without even realizing it, the confidence in his stance faltering for the first time since this entire scene began. And it would have been amusing if it weren't so predictable, because even in my last life, even before everything fell apart, there had always been one person whose presence alone was enough to disrupt whatever fragile illusion they tried to build. One person who didn't play by the same rules, who didn't bend to the same expectations, and who certainly didn't tolerate lies when they were laid out so openly in front of him. And yet, back then, I had never truly understood the weight of that, had never realized how much that quiet indifference concealed, how much he saw and chose not to say. And now, standing here again with the memory of everything I had lost carved into me, I found myself looking at him differently, not as a distant figure on the edge of my life, but as a variable I could no longer afford to ignore. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice low, controlled, carrying just enough authority to cut through the lingering tension without raising it further. And for a brief moment, no one answered, because no one quite knew how to. Not when the truth was already being broadcast live to thousands of strangers. Not when every word had the potential to shift the narrative in a direction they couldn't fully control anymore. And I could see it then, the hesitation, the calculation flickering behind their eyes as they tried to decide which version of the story would serve them best. Which lie would hold up under the weight of his attention? And in my last life, they had chosen quickly, confidently, because I had already been painted as the unstable one, the emotional one, the one who could be dismissed without question. But this time, the situation wasn't so simple. This time, there was evidence, there were witnesses, there was a version of me that refused to collapse on cue, and most importantly, there was him, standing there with a gaze that missed nothing. "It's nothing serious," my sister spoke first, her voice soft, composed once more, slipping back into her role with practiced ease. "Just a misunderstanding between us." And I almost admired the way she tried to minimize it, to smooth over the edges, to reduce everything that had just happened into something small and manageable, something that could be dismissed if handled correctly. But I didn't interrupt, didn't correct her, didn't rush to expose anything, because this time, I didn't need to rush. I had already set everything in motion, and all I had to do now was let it unfold. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated, his tone unchanged yet somehow sharper, as if the words themselves had been weighed and found lacking, and his gaze shifted, not to her, not to the man beside her, but to me, lingering just long enough to make it clear that whatever answer he was looking for, he expected it from me, not from them. And for a moment, the world seemed to narrow to that single point of contact, that silent question hanging between us. And I felt it again, that strange, almost imperceptible sense of recognition, as if something in him was reaching towards something in me, as if the distance between this life and the last wasn't as absolute as it should have been, and my fingers tightened slightly against my palm, grounding myself, reminding myself that no matter what he sensed, no matter what he remembered or didn't remember, I was the only one who truly knew how this story had once ended, and I was the only one who could change it. "You came at the perfect time," I said, finally, my voice calm, steady, carrying just enough weight to draw his full attention. And without looking away, I lifted the phone slightly, angling it so that the live stream was impossible to ignore. The comments still flooding in, the evidence still clear, undeniable. And for the first time since he entered the room, his gaze flickered. Not in confusion, not in surprise, but in something far more subtle, something that looked dangerously close to understanding, as if he didn't need the full explanation, as if the pieces were already aligning in his mind faster than anyone else's. And that alone was enough to shift the atmosphere again, to tilt the balance just a little further away from them and closer to me. "Then explain it," he said. And it wasn't a request. It wasn't even a demand. It was a statement, simple and direct, leaving no room for evasion. And this time, when my sister tried to speak again, her voice didn't come as easily. The confidence she had rebuilt cracking under the pressure of his attention. Because unlike the audience, unlike the family, unlike the man beside her who had already chosen his side, he wasn't looking for a performance. He wasn't interested in tears or excuses. He was looking for the truth. And the truth was the one thing she couldn't afford to give. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, before she could recover, my tone light, almost casual, as if I was describing something insignificant. And yet every word landed with precision, cutting through the layers of lies they had been trying to build. And I could feel the shift ripple through the live stream, the audience reacting instantly, the narrative beginning to turn, slowly but surely, as doubt replaced certainty, as questions replaced assumptions. And for the first time since this began, I wasn't the one on the defensive. I wasn't the one being judged. I was the one controlling the story. And as that realization settled, as the weight of everything I had endured in my last life aligned with the choices I was making now, I took a small step forward, closing the distance just enough to stand within his line of sight completely. Not behind anyone, not overshadowed, not ignored, but seen, fully and clearly. And I met his gaze without hesitation, without fear, letting him see whatever it was he had already begun to notice, whatever it was that set me apart from the version of me he might have known before. And for a brief moment, something unspoken passed between us, something that didn't need words to exist, something that felt like the beginning of a shift neither of us could fully define yet. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by the quiet, controlled tension of the present, the unresolved conflict still hanging in the air, the truth still waiting to be fully revealed. And yet, for the first time since I woke up in this life, I felt something steady beneath all the chaos, something certain, because no matter how this played out, no matter how they tried to twist it, no matter how many times they had succeeded in the past, this time, I wasn't alone in this moment. And whether he realized it or not, whether he chose to stand beside me or not, the simple fact that he was here, that he was watching, that he was questioning, had already changed everything, because this time, the story wasn't just repeating itself. It was evolving, and I was no longer the girl who would be left behind when it did. The moment the last echo of silence settled after his question, I knew it was time, because everything I had done up until now, every word I chose not to say, every reaction I refused to give, every second I let them believe they were still in control, had all been leading to this exact point. And unlike my last life, where I had stood here empty-handed, desperate, trying to defend myself with nothing but broken trust and blind hope, this time I came prepared. This time, I had already seen the ending once and rewrote the path before it could reach me again. And as the live stream continued to surge, the comments stacking faster than anyone could read, I slowly lowered my gaze to my phone, my thumb hovering over the screen for just a fraction of a second, not out of hesitation, but out of precision, because timing mattered, impact mattered, and I intended to make this moment unforgettable. "You wanted an explanation," I said calmly, my voice cutting through the tension without effort. And when I lifted my eyes again, they were no longer soft, no longer passive, but sharp, deliberate, fully in control. "So let's make sure everyone hears the truth properly." And before anyone could interrupt, before my sister could step in with another carefully crafted lie, or my mother could demand I stop, I tapped the screen and the first piece of evidence appeared, not just on my phone, but mirrored directly into the live stream, projected in a way that left no room for denial. A series of messages, timestamps clear, names unmistakable, conversations that should have never existed if their story had been real. And for a split second, nothing happened, because shock has a way of freezing people before it breaks them. And I watched as their expressions shifted in slow motion, confusion flickering into disbelief, disbelief twisting into panic as recognition set in, because they knew, instantly, exactly what they were looking at. "This is," my sister started, her voice faltering for the first time in a way she couldn't hide. And I didn't let her finish, didn't give her the chance to reshape the narrative, because this wasn't a story she could control anymore, not when the proof was already in front of thousands of eyes. "Your messages," I said simply, my tone almost indifferent, as if I was stating something obvious, something that didn't require explanation. And the comments exploded again, faster, louder, the tone shifting dramatically as the audience processed what they were seeing, the timeline, the context, the implications, and I could almost feel the tide turning in real time, the invisible weight of public opinion shifting away from them, away from the lie they had been building, and toward something far more dangerous, truth. "You said this just started," I continued, scrolling deliberately, revealing more, each line cutting deeper than the last. "But these go back months, planning, meeting, hiding. So tell me, which part was the misunderstanding?" And there it was, the first real crack, my sister's composure shattering as she took a step back, her hand slipping from his sleeve as if she needed distance, as if proximity alone could expose her further, while the man beside her stood frozen, his face draining of color as the reality of the situation finally caught up with him. Because this wasn't something he could talk his way out of. This wasn't something he could dismiss as a misunderstanding or twist into a different perspective. This was evidence, clear and undeniable. And I wasn't done yet, not even close. Because one piece of truth wasn't enough to dismantle a lie that had been built so carefully. "And if that's not enough," I added, my voice softer now, almost conversational, as if what I was about to show next was just a minor detail, something insignificant, even though I knew it would be the final blow. And I tapped the screen again, switching to the next file, a video this time, grainy but clear enough to recognize, recorded from an angle they hadn't known existed, a place they thought was safe, where they had spoken freely, where they had planned everything without fear of being overheard. And as the footage began to play, the room fell into a different kind of silence, heavier, suffocating, because this wasn't just proof of betrayal anymore. This was intent. This was premeditation. This was the truth they had never expected to be seen. "She'll never find out," my sister's voice echoed faintly from the recording, followed by his, lower, hesitant, but complicit. And I didn't need to say anything else, didn't need to explain or accuse, because the video did it for me. Every word, every expression, every second captured and broadcast to an audience that had already begun to turn against them. And when it ended, the silence that followed was absolute, the kind that doesn't just fill a room, but crushes everything inside it. And I could see it in their faces, the realization, The collapse. The understanding that there was no way back from this, no way to recover, no way to rewrite what had just been exposed. "You set me up," my sister whispered finally, her voice barely audible. But I heard it, and I smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with a calm certainty that left no room for misunderstanding. "No," I replied, shaking my head slightly. "You set yourself up. I just remembered." And that was the truth, the simplest, most devastating truth of all, because everything they were experiencing now, every ounce of panic, every flicker of fear, every crack in their carefully constructed image, it wasn't something I created. It was something they had already done, already planned, already chosen. I had simply refused to let it happen the same way twice. And as the livestream numbers surged higher than ever, the comments flooding in with outrage, disbelief, support, condemnation, the entire narrative flipping in a matter of seconds, I took a slow breath, steady and controlled, my hand instinctively returning to my stomach, grounding me, reminding me why I had done all of this in the first place, why I had refused to break, why I had chosen to fight. And when I lifted my gaze again, I didn't look at them, didn't look at the family who had already begun to falter in their certainty, didn't look at the man who had once been my future and was now nothing more than a consequence of his own choices. I looked at him, the one who had been watching all along, the one whose presence had shifted the balance before I even made my move. And for a brief moment, our eyes met again. And this time, there was no question in his gaze, no uncertainty, only understanding, clear and sharp, as if he had seen exactly what I had done and why, as if he recognized the difference between the girl I had been and the one standing here now. And something unspoken passed between us once more, something that felt dangerously close to alignment. And I realized then, as the chaos unfolded around us, as the world outside this room reacted to the truth I had just revealed, that this wasn't just revenge anymore. It wasn't just about exposing them or reclaiming what I had lost. It was something more, something deeper. Because for the first time since I woke up in this life, I wasn't just reacting to the past. I was shaping the future. And no matter how many times fate tried to repeat itself, no matter how many times they thought they could control the outcome, this time the ending belonged to me. The silence after the video ended didn't just linger. It collapsed, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire room had been stripped of air, and for a brief moment, no one moved, no one spoke. Because there are truths that don't just expose lies, they erase them completely, leaving nothing behind to defend, nothing left to hide behind. And I watched as everything they had built began to crumble in real time, my sister's face draining of color as her carefully constructed innocence shattered beyond repair, her lips parting as if to speak, to deny, to explain. But no sound came out, because there was nothing she could say that wouldn't make it worse, nothing she could twist that hadn't already been seen. And beside her, the man who had once promised me forever stood frozen, his expression hollow, as if the weight of what he had done had finally caught up to him. Not out of guilt, but out of consequence, because for the first time, he understood that this wasn't something he could escape. Not with charm, not with excuses, not with silence. And the live stream reflected it all. The comments surging faster than ever, outrage replacing sympathy, condemnation drowning out doubt, thousands of voices turning against them in a wave that couldn't be stopped, couldn't be controlled, couldn't be undone. And I could almost feel it, that shift, that irreversible turning point where the narrative no longer belonged to them, where the story they had written collapsed under the weight of its own lies. And then, just as it had happened in my last life, but reversed, my mother stepped forward again, her expression no longer firm, no longer certain, but shaken, her eyes darting between the evidence, the screen, the faces of the people she had chosen over me. And for the first time, hesitation crept into her voice. This can't be right," she said, But even she didn't sound convinced, because deep down, she knew, just like everyone else did, that the truth had already been laid bare, that there was no version of this where they were innocent anymore. And my sister finally broke, her composure collapsing as she shook her head desperately, tears spilling down her face, not the controlled, perfect tears from before, but messy, frantic, real in the way panic always is. "It's not what it looks like," she cried, her voice cracking as she reached out blindly, not toward me, but toward the people around her, toward anyone who might still believe her, still protect her, still save her from the consequences she had never expected to face. But no one moved, no one stepped in, because belief is fragile, and once it breaks, it doesn't come back the same way. And I watched her unravel with a calm detachment that would have terrified the version of me from my last life, because back then, I would have felt something, anger, pain, satisfaction, but now all I felt was distance, as if this moment had already happened, already ended, already been buried with the version of me who had died on that cold marble floor. And this was simply the correction, the inevitable conclusion to something that should have never been allowed to continue. "You said you loved me," she turned to him suddenly, her voice desperate, searching for something to hold on to. But he didn't answer, didn't meet her eyes, because love built on lies doesn't survive truth. And for the first time, she was truly alone, standing in the ruins of everything she had tried to steal. And the weight of that realization crushed her in a way no accusation ever could. And behind her, my mother's silence spoke louder than any words, because the choice she had made was unraveling right in front of her. The daughter she had protected revealed for what she truly was. The daughter she had cast aside, standing untouched by the chaos, unbroken, unyielding, and it was too late to undo it, too late to go back, too late to pretend she hadn't seen what she had seen. And the live stream captured all of it, every expression, every tear, every crack in the illusion, broadcasting their downfall to a world that would never forget it. And as the chaos settled into something quieter, something heavier, I finally moved. Not toward them, not toward the family that had never chosen me, but forward, stepping into the space they had once occupied, reclaiming it without hesitation, without permission, because this time, I wasn't the one being pushed out. I was the one who remained. And I could feel it then, that shift, not just in the room, but in everything. The story, the balance, the future that had once been decided for me, now resting firmly in my hands. And before anyone could speak, before anyone could try to repair what had already been destroyed, a voice cut through the silence, low, steady, undeniable. "That's enough." And the moment he stepped forward, the tension changed again. Not with chaos this time, but with clarity. Because unlike everyone else, he didn't hesitate, didn't question, didn't waver. And when he stopped beside me, close enough that I could feel the presence of him without needing to look, the entire room seemed to still, as if waiting for something final, something decisive. And I turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. And what I saw there wasn't surprise, wasn't doubt, but certainty, as if he had already come to a conclusion long before anyone else, as if everything that had just unfolded had only confirmed what he already knew. And without breaking eye contact, without giving anyone else the chance to interrupt, he spoke, his voice carrying through the room and beyond it, through the live stream, through every screen that still watched. "The child," he said, and for a fraction of a second the world seemed to pause. Every sound, every movement, every breath suspended in that single moment is mine. And the impact of those words rippled outward instantly, shock crashing through the room, through the live stream, through the fragile silence that had just begun to settle. And I felt it, the shift, the final twist that none of them had seen coming. None of them could have prepared for. And slowly, Deliberately, I placed my hand over my stomach again, not hiding it, not denying it, but claiming it, openly, unapologetically, and for the first time since all of this began, a real smile touched my lips. Not cold, not calculated, but certain. Because this was the moment everything changed, completely and irreversibly. And when I spoke, my voice was soft, but it carried further than any scream ever could. In my last life, I lost everything, I said quietly, my gaze sweeping over the people who had once defined my world and now meant nothing. But this time, I paused, just long enough for the weight of my words to settle, just long enough for them to understand that this wasn't just an ending, it was a beginning. I'm the one who decides who falls. And as the live stream erupted one final time, as the story reached its peak, its conclusion, its perfect reversal, I didn't look back, didn't hesitate, didn't doubt, because for the first time in both my lives, I had already won.